I have a very old Christmas carol for us now. This one comes from Gregorian chant, actually. O come, Emmanuel. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appears. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and earth's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou wisdom from on high, and order all things far and nigh. To us the path of knowledge show, and cause us in her ways to go. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, desire of nations, bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and quarrel cease. Fill the whole world with heaven's peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Amen. So our first reading is actually from the lectionary. It's Psalm 25. And I've chosen this because I really like it as a prayer for hope. So here's the reading. And this is a modern interpretation of Psalm 25 by Reverend Christine Robinson. I put my trust in you, O God, as best as I am able. May I be strong. May I not be afraid. May all who open their hearts hear your voice and know your love. Lead me, teach me, help me to trust. You are gracious to us, O God. You guide us. You forgive our clumsy ways. You help us prosper. When I am sad and anxious, I school my heart to trust. I act with integrity and uprightness, and hope to feel your touch in my heart. May it be so for all the people of the earth who call you by many names. Amen. Now, the one line of this that really jumped out for me of what we're doing in Advent was this one. Hope to feel your touch in my heart. We're listening and waiting and hoping to make ourselves ready to receive that trust. Advent, Adventus in Latin means arriving, but there's another side to it, which is the Greek. I think it's pronounced parousia, P-A-R-O-U-S-I-A. Now, it also means arriving, but it also means presence. Presence. And Robert Holden, who we were hearing talking earlier, he said that Advent is something that is already here, but we're too busy to notice. The light is already here, but we're too busy to notice. All right, let's jump into the request of the worship planning folk around the advent of my own faith. There's a song by the singer-songwriter Dar Williams. Dar Williams is a wonderful singer, a folk musician, American. And she has a song called After All. And when I was really struggling, I would put it on repeat. And there's a line in it that goes like this. When you live in a world, well, that gets into who you thought you'd be. Now I laugh at how the world changed me. I think life chose me after all. I think I've got these lyrics for you here. Let me sing it again. Well, the sun rose with so many colors it nearly broke my heart. It worked me over like a work of art, and I was a part of all that. 'Cause when you live in a world, well, it gets into who you thought you'd be. And now I laugh at how the world changed me. I think life chose me after all. And she goes on to affirm the choice to love even in the most painful of circumstances. It's a really beautiful song and was a bit of a personal flotation device for me when I found myself stuck in winter forever. Or so it seemed at the time. But I think the advent of my faith, really, my life has changed me. And but I'm going to try and give you some of the steps. And I'm sure it's kind of universal. We all experience God differently and put different names on it, but our experience of life tends to be pretty universal. So I grew up in an agnostic, atheist-leaning family. My parents quit their faith when I was a young child. And I think my mother realized that the teachings in the church were not as big as what she saw out in the world. So my own faith started as a kind of vague feeling and intuition. Like I would walk on a battlefield like Culloden and I'd feel the eeriness of it. Or I'd walk into an ancient church and there was a peace there. I just wanted to sit down and quiet, even as a child. Pretty much I was agnostic, sitting on the fence, didn't know what to believe, but I was drawn towards compassionate action for the creatures and for the people. I sat on the fence because I didn't know what to believe and I didn't know what to make of all the cruelty and evil in the world. And in my 20s, I really began to question and listen, probably in my mid-20s, actually. Before that, I didn't really give religion a look in. And I think the advent of faith is often about recognizing truth. You know, kind of, for me, it resonates within me. Other people, it might feel more like a idea thing, a light bulb going off. But for me, I feel it in my body, a kind of deja vu feeling. I'm going to jump back to Advent now. We're going to thread the two together today and look at what is Advent. All right, so I've got some videos from Work of the People here for us. This one's quite short and it's a mishmash of a much longer video which is on the webpage that I created for the church. I'll post that into the chat while you're watching.
The word Advent comes from the Latin adventus, meaning arrival, right? Coming, the coming. And I think, you know, it's that preparation for the coming of Christ. But what do we mean by that, right? If God has already come to us, what are we waiting for? You know, in the sense, if God has already become incarnate in Jesus, what are we waiting for? And I think that's a really interesting question, you know. I don't think we really have a good sense of what Advent's about. I think that Advent, that waiting, that arrival, or what's coming to us from the future, I think we can say that's God coming to us from the future in a sense that, you know, we're called to awaken to what's already in our midst. So it's that, I think Advent is a coming to a new consciousness of God, you know, already loving us into something new, into something more whole. That we're not, in a sense, waiting for what's not there. We're, in a sense, to be attending to what's already there. But the other part, I think, we can think of Advent is God is waiting for us to wake up, you know, as if we're asleep in the manger, not Jesus. Jesus is, you know, alive in our midst. And sometimes I do think we have things a little bit backwards. I think Jesus is in the manger and we've got to wake him up, and now, we have to do good things to one another. But what if we're in the manger and God is already awakened in our midst?
Advent. Advent is that season where we're talking about the God that is coming.
My mother tells me that even when I was really small, I said, "Oh, it's Advent." Well, maybe that was partly because it meant Christmas is coming, but that's not all. It just made me realize, even as a child, that the church is not afraid to look into the dark and to say, this is a dark world with dark things happening in it. And in the midst of this dark world, God happens. In spite of ourselves.
That God is always coming toward us. God never turns God's back on us. God's always coming toward us.
Very interesting. One of the things that helped me begin to learn from the religious traditions was I accidentally ended up living in the Bible Belt in Australia. So here I am, I'm about 30 years old, and I have to be closeted. I can't be out as a transgender person because my wife, who's no longer my wife, my first wife, she was the head teacher of a school. It was a Lutheran middle school. And if they had known that she was married to somebody who was trans and I lived on the property, she could have been fired and probably would have had a lot of problems. So here we are. This is the context. And I realized I needed community. I needed to connect. I needed to understand what these people who were very Bible orientated, what their faith was. And I made the decision to always try and look for what we had in common, right? So when I watch a video, even to this day, like that video, I try and look for where my faith overlaps with what the person is saying. And you know what? 99.9% of the time, it works. There was one time I was learning to make cheese with my neighbor. And I said, what's motivating you to make cheese? And he said, because of the rapture. And when Jesus comes, it might take a year or two for all of us to disappear into heaven and society will collapse, and I want to be able to eat good food. And I didn't know what to say to that because I didn't have any faith in common with that. But apart from that one conversation, it worked really, really well to always look for the overlap between my faith and the scripture or what the person is saying. Now, the first speaker was Ilia Delio. I think that's how you say her name. She is a San Franciscan sister and a theologian. She said, Advent should slow us down to awaken us to the deep mystery that we are immersed in. Advent should slow us down to awaken us to a deep mystery that we are immersed in. The biggest wake-up for me was rubbing shoulders with the Quakers in my early 20s. So I used to go on demos a lot because there's a lot to demonstrate against, a lot of injustice in the world. And the Quakers were always there, and sometimes they organized the marches. But the way that they were in the demo was completely different from me and the angry students. They had a peace. There was something that they were embodying that was missing. And I remember leaning into that. And then later, as I volunteered in prisons, it was the Quakers again that were rubbing shoulders with me, with the inmates. And they talked about that there's a non-violent solution in every situation, no matter how unbelievably hopeless. And that light in the darkness, that peace where there's no business being peace, caught my attention like a candle in the darkness. What is this? How come in certain situations of hopelessness, there's kindness and love And people put their lives on the line to save another person. You hear about it all the time. People diving in front of trains on the subway to wrestle somebody off the tracks. And the clearest example I can think of with this is Christmas in the Trenches. So in 1914, the first winter in World War I in France, there was a truce, and I've got a beautiful song about this that I'll sing for you. It's by John McCutcheon. It's called Christmas in the Trenches. My name is Francis Tolliver. I come from Liverpool. 2 years ago the war was waiting for me after school. To Belgium and to Flanders, to Germany to here, I fought for king and country I loved so dear. 'Twas Christmas in the trenches where the frost so bitter hung. The frozen field of France where still no Christmas song was sung. Our families back in England were toasting us that day. They're brave and glorious lads so far away. I was lying with me messmate on a cold and rocky ground when across the line of battle came the most peculiar sound. Says I, now listen up me boys, each soldier strained to hear, as one young German voice sang out so clear. He's singing bloody well, you know, my partner said to me. Soon one by one each German voice joined in harmony. The cannons rested silent, the gas cloud rolled no more, as Christmas brought us respite from the war. As soon as they were finished and a reverent pause was spent, God rest ye merry gentlemen struck up some lads from Kent. The next they sang was Stille Nacht, 'tis silent night, says I, and in two tongues one song filled up that sky. There's someone coming towards us, the frontline sentry cried. All sights were fixed on one lone figure trudging from their side. His truce flag like a Christmas star shone on that plain so bright, as he bravely strode unarmed into the night. Then one by one on either side walked into no man's land. With neither gun nor bayonet we met there hand to hand. We shared some secret brandy, we wished each other well, and in a flare-lit soccer match, we gave them hell. We traded chocolates, cigarettes, and photographs from home. These sons and fathers far away from families of their own. Young Sanders plays his squeeze box, and they had a violin. This curious and unlikely band of men. Soon daylight strode upon us, and France was France once more. With sad farewells we each began to settle back to war. But the question haunted every heart that was there that night: whose family have I fixed within my sights? 'Twas Christmas in the trenches where the frost so bitter hung. The frozen fields of France were warmed as Christmas songs were sung. For the walls they kept between us to exact the works of war had been crumbled and were gone forevermore. My name is Francis Tolliver, I come from Liverpool. Each Christmas time since World War I have learned this lesson well, that the ones who call the shots are not among the dead and lame, and on each end of the rifle we're the same. The people in charge fought really hard to make sure that that never happened again, because it was so difficult for the men to go back to war. I say men, many of them were boys. one of whom was my late grandfather. Now please note that this incredible story, this true story, set into song there, didn't stop World War II. It went on for many more years. The soldiers did go back to fighting. But it's an example of kindness where there should be none. And when we see something like that, something awakens in us. And I recognized in this story, and also in the young people I used to work with. I used to be an LGBT youth worker that worked with homeless youth and kids that were in really difficult, incredibly difficult situations. And some of them had a resilience and a loving kindness that their life was the opposite of. And I was always absolutely amazed by that. That song that we sang earlier, within our darkest night, you kindle a fire that never dies away, is very true. And that was a really big heart opening to me becoming a person of a very strong faith that includes both spiritual and religious. And part of it was looking at the darkness and realizing this is human error. This is not sacred. This is not Mother Nature. This is not the way. This is us being lost. That inside us, our true nature would not do things like war, would not do things like walk past a homeless person. So another aspect of my faith that emerged was looking at my own struggle, my own vulnerability, and learning from that, and then offering the insights to others. You know, often we can't bring healing to ourselves, but we can bring the circumstance we never got to other people, and then we receive healing in the mystery. So I've got another video, it's quite short, and it's looking at Advent as a way of responding to the world.
The assumption that if God is going to arrive, then it will look wrathful. And the realization, you know, this was, even John the Baptist expected that. John the Baptist was pretty thrown by Jesus not being as wrathful as he had expected. And the realization that actually there is no wrath at all in God, that wrath is our wrath, and we're pretty good at it. And that God is going to start undoing all of that from within, starting from the most vulnerable place that a human can be, which is as a baby.
The Christmas story for me is a constant reminder that the calling is really to be born and reborn again and again and again in the shape of my own true self. A baby is very vulnerable. A baby needs nurturing and tending. That's also true of whatever part of me it is that wants to now come out of hiding, that wants to be embodied and incarnate in the world. And I need that unconditional love to provide that nurturing and tending.
Now, what are those things that sustain us and guide us and hold us?
You know, the only way we can live is through love, and that's what I'm hanging my hat on. You know, I think once we reconcile the fact that love is difficult, but it's the only thing of value in life, and at that point, we love, period.
That video we just watched is actually more than half an hour long. I have it on the web page that I've created. Kathy will send it out during the week. It's in the chat, simondevoyle.com/Suquamish. There's so much to say about Advent, but we've got more weeks of it. Hurrah! I'm so excited to delve into this topic. What I can say about the advent of my own faith as we begin to conclude our reflection today is a huge part of it was modeled for me in the presence of others. Remember, the Greek word for Advent includes a definition of presence. There were people who had a faith in me, in my ability to heal, my ability to find forgiveness when there was none. Now, these were all people who had been through their own personal fire and resurrection. They knew something of the new life that is given, and they held it strong for me. And so Anam Cara, Soul Friendship, and elders, people of faith who held me when I was struggling, and not really so much when I was exploring and asking questions, more when life hits the fan, right? When things go wrong. How do these people of faith respond? And what wisdom do they share with me when I am really struggling? And one last point, I'm going to get into the wisdom of the 12 steps a little bit. There's a wonderful poem by Hafiz. It's called In a Tree House. I'm going to read it to you. Light will someday split you open, even if your life is now a cage. For a divine seed, the crown of destiny is hidden and sown on an ancient fertile plain that you hold the title to. Love will surely burst you wide open into an unfettered, blooming new galaxy, even if your mind is now a spoiled mule. A life-giving radiance will come. Now, it's a longer poem than that, but that line about even if your mind is currently a spoiled mule, I think that that's so true about our ego consciousness, and how life, through kindness but often through adversity, splits us open to the wisdom that I think is so beautifully held in the 12 steps. Now, I'm not somebody who is in recovery or had an addiction, but I've learned so much wisdom from my friends that are. And there's something about, where are you placing your power? What is your higher power? What is defining you? Is your wound defining you? Is your human ego ability to do everything defining you? Or do you have a belief in an underlying principle of compassion or a faith tradition that you can hold up, because that light will be able to guide you when your life falls apart in a way that your own mind cannot? Now, I'm talking from personal experience here. When I went through my own breakdown, I found that my own ability to navigate and think things through was not remotely big enough, and I had to rely on loving kindness and my sacred understanding of God, which is love, to guide me, because I was so lost in my own pain. And I think that is what the 12 steps are talking about when they're talking about, have you surrendered to a higher power, whatever you call that? So the recipe for my faith is quite simple, and it was the same at the start as it is now. Work out where love is in the situation and co-create with that as best as you can. And here's the newer part. Risk failure risk being wrong. If you think love and God is present, go straight towards it. You know, St. Francis would always do that, and sometimes he got it wrong. He was the holy fool. But his ability to just not worry about what people thought and just go for it is part of what allowed him to be such an enormous, loving presence. Thank you for listening. Please take what is useful and throw away the rest. We're going to jump into a Christmas carol again. This one's a brand new one. Well, it's not brand new. It's a few years old. It's my favorite. It's called Peace Child by Bernadette Farrell. Peace, child, in the sleep of the night, in the dark before light, you come in the silence of stars, in the violence of wars. Savior, your name. Peace, child, to the road and the storm, to the gun and the bomb. You come through the hate and the hurt, through the hunger and dirt, bearing a dream. Peace, child, to our dark and our sleep, to the conflict we reap. Now come, be your dream born alive, held in hope, wrapped in love, God's true shalom. Peace, child, in the sleep of the night, in the dark before light, you come in the silence of stars, in the violence of wars. Savior, your name.